Ethan stood in the doorway, Tom Ford on his collar, court order in his hand, the same cologne I gave him when he won his first case. Now it burned. Behind him, 2 deputies. No emotion, no questions, just the sound of justice, mechanical, blind. "Ma'am, you have 15 minutes. He didn't flinch, didn't speak, just pressed his thumb onto the notary seal. Ka-chunk. It echoed like a verdict. I watched him sign, with the same hand I once taught to hold a crayon. And in that moment, I knew. This wasn't anger. This wasn't revenge. This was case law. And I raised him to win, even against me. And this was just the opening statement. Ethan used to fall asleep in the crook of my arm, breathing softly against my collarbone. When he was 5, he thought lawyers were superheroes. At 8, he used to cross-examine his stuffed animals. By 12, he corrected my grammar. And by 16, he stopped saying mom when his friends were around. But he always came home, even when law school broke him down, even when he lost his first case, even when his fiancée left, he came home. And I was always there, with soup, with silence, with open arms. So when I saw that court order in his hand, my brain refused to process it. It had to be a mistake. Maybe he was protecting us. Maybe someone else filed it. Maybe this wasn't real. But the seal was real. The ink was fresh. And the silence between us, that was the loudest part. I remember the day I signed over part of the house to him. We had just refinanced. His credit was strong. It made sense. He hugged me and said, "You'll always be safe here, Mom." I didn't know that paper would come back to gut me. What changed? That's what everyone asks. Here's what they don't know. This didn't start with a signature. It started months earlier, with a late-night phone call, a locked office drawer, and a question Ethan refused to answer. That's when I felt it, the shift, the moment my son stopped being my son and started becoming something else entirely. And the more I pulled at the threads, the more I realized he wasn't just preparing a case. He was preparing a cover-up. The knock came at 6:42 a.m. on a Tuesday. I was still in my robe, pouring coffee into a chipped mug Ethan made in 3rd grade, one of those wobbly glazed clay ones that look like they belong in a museum for broken things. The sun wasn't even up yet. 3 knocks, then silence. You know the kind, not waiting for an answer silence, but prepared silence, legal silence. When I opened the door, there were 2 sheriff's deputies. Behind them, a woman in a gray suit holding a manila envelope like it was nuclear. "Ma'am," she said, "you've been served." The words didn't land at first. She handed me the papers. I stared at the bold black letters, Emergency Protective Order, petitioned by Ethan D. Marshall, my son, the boy who used to sleepwalk into my bed during thunderstorms, now petitioning the court to remove me from my own house. I flipped pages with trembling hands, accusations, allegations, legal terms I didn't even recognize, undue influence, mental instability, hostile environment. They painted me like a villain, like I was dangerous, like I was unpredictable, like I wasn't the woman who raised him, but someone the state needed to protect him from. And then came the kicker. Petitioner seeks exclusive control of property located at 287 Maple Drive due to financial entanglement and concerns regarding the respondent's capacity. In plain English, he wanted the house, and he wanted me gone. I couldn't breathe. My hands went numb. All I could hear was the sound of the notary seal in my head. Ka-chunk. And right then, the truth hit me harder than the paperwork ever could. This wasn't just betrayal. It was strategy, planned, orchestrated, filed. And if Ethan thought I'd roll over quietly, he'd forgotten who taught him to fight in the first place. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat on the living room floor, surrounded by legal papers, coffee gone cold, and the echoes of Ethan's signature still ringing in my head. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw it, his face, blank with purpose. The boy I once rocked to sleep, now filing motions to have me removed like mold from the baseboards. I cried once, quietly, into my sleeve, not for the house, but for the realization that somewhere along the way, he stopped being mine. Around 3 a.m., something shifted. Not rage, not even sadness. Strategy. I pulled out every file I'd ever saved. Mortgage records, utility bills, notarized letters, even Ethan's old FAFSA forms. There had to be something. I went full law school widow. I searched public court filings, read custody statutes, and flagged every clause in the order that felt off. And then I found it, a timestamp. Buried in the fine print was a filing date that didn't make sense. The petition was filed on a Friday, but I'd been in the hospital that morning getting a stress test. There were security logs, hospital wristbands, maybe even camera footage. It wasn't a silver bullet, but it was a thread. And if Ethan thought I wouldn't pull it, he'd forgotten where he got his instincts. I called a friend, retired paralegal, half insomniac, fully brilliant. We met at a diner by dawn. She brought a yellow legal pad, and I brought a folder stuffed with receipts, Post-its, and a fury that felt oddly clear. I don't want revenge, I told her. I want the truth, in public, under oath. She nodded once and slid the pad across the table. Then let's start building your counterclaim. We spent 2 days buried in files, property records, power of attorney forms, email trails. Every time I thought we'd hit a wall, my paralegal friend would just tilt her head, mutter, "Not yet," and flip another page. It wasn't until we pulled up the deed history that her pen stopped moving. She tapped one line. A transfer filed 4 years ago, right after my husband's first heart attack. A document I had signed during a post-op blur, not realizing it named Ethan as a co-trustee on the house. That part I remembered. What I didn't remember, what no one caught back then, was the clause attached to it. Trustee rights shall be contingent on the health and mental fitness of the other party. And that clause had a date, the same week I was in the hospital again. Your son's petition, she said slowly, relied on a claim that you were mentally unfit. She slid the court papers next to the trust document. And if that claim were true, he wouldn't have had legal standing to file on behalf of the trust. He'd be disqualified the moment he asserted it. He had weaponized my weakness. And in doing so, he'd accidentally cut off his own right to act. That's when I realized this wasn't just a son trying to oust his mother. This was a son trying to consolidate power, but using a clause that collapses the moment he touches it. And there was more. A second clause, buried deeper, stated that any action taken by a sole trustee during a challenge to the other's fitness must be approved by a neutral fiduciary. There was no fiduciary, no approval, no record. What Ethan thought was airtight was technically void. And if this went to court, that would be my opening. Not a scream, not an accusation, just one sentence to the judge. Your Honor, I'd like to submit the trust clause, highlighted. Filing the counterclaim wasn't dramatic. No slammed doors, no raised voices, just a quiet Tuesday morning at the courthouse, the kind with bad coffee and tired fluorescent lights. I wore navy. Ethan always said I looked credible in navy. I tucked the trust clause, highlighted in yellow, into a manila folder and walked past the security checkpoint like I had nothing left to lose, which, in a way, was true. The clerk barely looked up. Filing a response? No, I said, steady. A counterclaim. She took the folder, time-stamped it, And just like that, the story he'd scripted began to unravel. It wasn't just one filing, it was three. The trust clause, rendering Ethan's original petition void by undermining his own legal standing. A motion for temporary injunction, preventing him from making financial decisions under the guise of sole trustee while the matter was under dispute. A civil claim for intentional misrepresentation and undue emotional distress, backed by notes from my cardiologist, documenting the spike in heart complications after service of the order. I didn't want to destroy him. I wanted the truth to stand in front of him and not blink. His attorney called 2 days later. "You really want to take this to court?" "I didn't start this," I said. "I'm just replying." Silence. Then, "He was trying to protect your future." "No," I replied. "He was trying to erase it and call it protection." The hearing was set for 3 weeks out. In that time, I went quiet. I didn't talk to Ethan, didn't answer his texts, didn't feed his ego with outrage. But I did file a protective counter order, naming him as someone who'd exploited fiduciary authority for personal gain. It was clinical, precise, like surgical revenge. I also filed a request to audit all financial activity linked to the trust for the past 18 months. Why? Because secrets always leave receipts. The turning point came the day my lawyer found it, buried in an email backup Ethan had forgotten to scrub, an internal memo he sent to the escrow officer on the refinance deal. It read, "She's not well enough to understand the paperwork. Let's just proceed. I'll handle it." Dated 2 days before I was even notified. That wasn't just unethical. That was fraudulent misrepresentation. But the real twist hadn't landed yet. The court requested Ethan's financial disclosures, and as his attorney passed them forward, a supplementary document slipped out, an account summary, one with my signature, digitally forged. I stared at it, blinking, and my lawyer didn't say a word. She simply passed it to the judge, highlighted line 14. The judge turned to Ethan. "Mr. Marshall, can you confirm when and where this document was signed?" He hesitated. His mouth opened, then closed. Silence at last. But it wasn't mine anymore. Next, the courtroom unraveling, the judge's decision, and the moment that rewrites the legacy between mother and son. Because when truth shows up, it doesn't knock. It walks in. The silence stretched. For once, Ethan had nothing to say. No rebuttal, no deflection, just a pause so sharp it cut through every polished argument he'd rehearsed. The judge looked down at the forged signature, then up at him. "Mr. Marshall, do you understand what this document implies?" Ethan blinked. His jaw twitched. Then he muttered, I'd have to review the file again, Your Honor." My attorney didn't flinch. She simply stood and handed the judge a second exhibit, a copy of the trust clause, highlighted. Again. Then she spoke, not to the courtroom, but directly to the bench. "Your Honor, we're not asking for punishment. We're asking for protection and for clarity." And that's when I realized this wasn't about revenge. It was about narrative. Ethan wanted to be the author of mine, to rewrite my role as weak, confused, irrelevant. But he forgot. I know how to hold a pen, too. The judge cleared her throat. "Given the evidence presented, including misrepresentation and procedural inconsistencies, this court will suspend the original protective order, place a freeze on all trust-related actions, and recommend further review of Mr. Marshall's fiduciary conduct." No gavel slam, no dramatic gasps, just a legal reset, and a quiet public shift in gravity. As we left the courtroom, Ethan didn't look at me. He looked at the floor, and I didn't speak, because this wasn't my victory to explain. It was his truth to carry now. The court recessed, but I didn't feel triumphant. I felt still, like I'd been holding my breath for months and was only now realizing I hadn't exhaled. There were no reporters waiting outside, No handshakes, no applause, just me, a stiff breeze, and a clerk closing the blinds in a second-story window. Justice doesn't always feel like victory. Sometimes it just feels like not losing anymore. Ethan didn't appeal. The trust was frozen. I kept the house for now, but the real shift didn't happen on paper. It happened in the way I looked at myself the morning after, no longer as someone who needed defending or someone they could sideline with silence. I wasn't broken. I wasn't fragile. I was precise, measured, unshaken. And that, I realized, was a kind of strength I hadn't known I had. 2 weeks later, there was a knock at my door. Not loud, not urgent, just familiar. I opened it to find a manila envelope. No return address, no signature. Inside, a photo. The one from Ethan's graduation, me, him, and his father, laughing in the sun. On the back, in Ethan's handwriting. I didn't know how else to say it. That's all. No apology, no explanation, just a memory we once shared. And the weight of everything that came after. I placed it on the mantel, didn't rip it, didn't frame it, just let it sit, quiet and undecided, because sometimes the law can untangle the mess, but it can't decide what you do with the pieces. And maybe forgiveness isn't a verdict. Maybe it's a decision you make again and again, until one day it stops hurting.